Morning everyone, in this video I'm going to cover the religious and non-religious attitudes towards war and conflict. War is an organised conflict normally consisting of intense violence between different states. War and conflict starts for numerous reasons, and throughout history we've seen wars start as a way of gaining power and control, gaining resources or land, correcting or fighting injustices, or defending national honour. In more recent history, we've seen also wars start as retaliation for crimes against a country, but also as a way of challenging power or unjust groups and dictators. Often wars are started with the interests of promoting justice. Justice is often seen as equivalent to fairness. It's a state in which everyone has equal provisions, equal opportunities, and is provided with what they're entitled to. The traditional Christian attitude to war is often based on Old Testament teachings. The Old Testament seems to recognise that there are times when violence is needed, and there are even numerous stories where God seems to order wars. For example, in Deuteronomy 20 it says, "But in the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes. You shall devote them to complete destruction as the Lord your God has commanded." Whilst the Ten Commandments say thou shalt not murder, there are occasions when the Jewish people are told by God to attack people who oppose them. On these occasions, war is not considered to be murder, but simply just violence. The famous Old Testament quotation used to justify violence is, "But if there is serious injury, you are to take a life for life, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot." This could imply that war or conflict can be justified on the grounds of retribution, paying someone back an equal amount. The Catholic position on war has traditionally been built on the just war theory. This theory provides a criteria to assess whether a war is just or acceptable. If a war doesn't meet the set criteria, it's judged to be an immoral war. As such, the Roman Catholic Church would say it's wrong. Many see war as a necessary evil, a tool to stand up against the injustices in the world. They argue that humans have a duty to stand up for those that are oppressed, and if we don't fight, then it's like we're accepting injustice. Cardinal Ratzinger, who went on to be Pope Benedict, said that he believed Christians could not ignore evil aggression that threatened to destroy not only Christian values, but also destroy humanity. He said defending oneself and others is a duty. So what is the just war theory? Well, it's a criteria that was devised by St. Augustine and then later developed by Thomas Aquinas. It's often divided into two categories. One part of the criteria is what makes the war ethical or just, what we might call jus ad bellum. However, the other part of the criteria is how it should be fought, which we might call jus in bello. So the ethical guidelines include that the war must be fought for a just cause. For example, it has to be against invasion or for self-defence, not to gain power or wealth. It also has to be declared and controlled by a lawful authority, and it must be fought with the interest of promoting good and avoiding evil. So the second part of the criteria then is the practical guidelines on how it should be fought. They include that the war must be a last resort when all peaceful solutions like interfaith dialogue and negotiation have tried and failed. The war should be fought with proportionality, with just enough force to achieve victory. They should only target legitimate targets, so civilians should be protected, and it must have a reasonable chance of success, whereby the good which is achieved by the war must be greater than the evil that led to the war. However, in recent years there have been some concerns regarding whether or not a just war is possible in this modern age due to the advanced nature of weapons. One pope has even said it's impossible to conceive a just war in this nuclear age. Pope Francis has often been very outspoken about wanting to promote peace over war. He encouraged society and political leaders to learn from the mistakes of the past. In 2018, Pope Francis said, "It seems we do not learn. While we pray for all the victims of that terrible tragedy, let us say forcefully, invest in peace, not on war." The New Testament, however, focuses on the life and teachings of Jesus, and he's often described as a pacifist, someone who believes that violence or war is wrong. This is based on events such as his arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane, when one of Jesus' disciples wanted to defend him using violence. Jesus said, "Put your sword back in its place, for all those who live by the sword die by the sword." There are two occasions in the Gospel when Jesus obviously shows his anger. One of these is in the temple in Jerusalem. Whilst it's been interpreted as violence or conflict, most Christians believe that this is simply righteous anger rather than acts of violence. Instead, the advice Jesus gave his followers when someone wrongs or harms them was to turn the other cheek, rather than resorting to war or conflict. Furthermore, in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, Jesus says that those who promote peace in society will gain entry into heaven. He said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." Quakers are a Christian denomination that believe that any form of violence is unacceptable as it goes against the sanctity of life. They'll try to protect life and treat all people with dignity and love. This inevitably means that any form of violence or war is wrong. Quakers are therefore the only exclusively pacifist Christian group, and this is expressed in their mission statement. They say, "Our conviction is that love is at the heart of existence and all human beings are equal in the eyes of God, and that we must live in a way that reflects this." Muslim attitudes to war and peace are based on the teachings of the Quran. There are two main ideas in Muslim teaching that relate to war, including jihad, to struggle in the way of Allah, and Harb al-Maqadis, a holy war. Remember, there are two different types of jihad. You have the greater jihad, which refers to the inner struggle Muslims may experience, like overcoming temptation. The lesser jihad is the struggles that involve violence. This could include military jihad or a holy war for Allah. However, Islam is a religion that advocates peace and peacemaking. The ideal society, according to the Quran, is Dar al-Salam, which means the house of peace. However, it's not a pacifist religion. Fighting and war is permitted in certain circumstances when all else has been tried and failed. Prophet Muhammad encouraged his followers to find a way of resolving their conflicts and promoting interfaith dialogue over the use of violence. Prophet Muhammad even told his followers, "Hate your enemy mildly, he may become your friend one day." Therefore, in Islam, there is a very strict criteria used for deciding whether or not war or violence can be considered just war, and what constitutes grounds for a lesser jihad. What is clear is that war should only be fought for Allah. In the Quran, it says, "Fight for the sake of Allah those who fight against you, but do not attack them first." This also makes it clear to Muslims that they're not permitted to start any violence, and it should only ever be used as a last resort. Furthermore, any violence should only last as long as needed. If the enemy surrenders or calls for peace, Muslims are expected to put an end to that violence. In the Quran it says, "But if the enemy inclines towards peace, do thou also incline towards peace, and trust in Allah, for he is one that hears and knows all things." The criteria for holy wars in Islam include that it has to be fought for a just cause, which is either that Islam is being attacked or that people are suffering. It must be a last resort, and all non-violent methods should have been tried first. It must be declared by a Muslim authority, and it must cause minimal suffering. It shouldn't target innocent civilians, especially elderly, women or children, and it must end when the enemy surrenders. Any prisoners of war at that point have to be returned. Prophet Muhammad himself said, "I enjoin you to treat the captives well." Humanists seek to live good lives without religious beliefs. They don't use any holy books to make decisions about war. Instead, they use reason, experience, and respect for others when thinking about moral issues. In many ways, their ideas are based on utilitarian principles of achieving the greatest happiness for the greatest number, an approach developed by the economist and social campaigner Jeremy Bentham. Humanists recognise that wars are hugely destructive, ruining lives, wasting resources and money, and degrading the environment. Humanists would respond to the issue of war by saying that we should use our intelligence and reason, and we should always seek the non-violent solutions first. However, they do recognise that violence in self-defence or to protect our own lives and rights of others can sometimes be justified on a national level. Humanists strongly support the work of the United Nations, aiming to resolve conflicts between nations peacefully. Humanists point out and are very critical of the fact that over the centuries there have been many wars fought for religious differences, and they believe that that's an absurd reason for killing other people. As such, humanists can support wars in the interest of justice, but it should be a last resort and not fought for religious reasons. Humanists strongly support the work of the United Nations, aiming to resolve conflicts between nations peacefully. Humanists point out and are very critical of the fact that over the centuries there have been many wars fought for religious differences, and they believe that that's an absurd reason for killing other people. As such, humanists can support wars in the interest of justice, but it should be a last resort and not fought for religious reasons.